Patrick, well, I have my awful blind here. You have these lovely birds in the background, but did you know
Yeah.
the SPCA is recommending people take their feeders down?
Well, because of the
Set outbreak, yes.
well, no, apparently that's over.
No, just saw something yesterday.
Oh, really? Okay.
Oh, well, I mean,
Well, I was told
admire your commitment to nature.
I was told that it was over. Anyway, yes, it's a chilly but nice spring day. Thought I'd brag about it to all our Ontario viewers.
Yeah.
Although I guess it's nice there too, so I don't even know. But anyone who's stuck in snow, here you go. This is what it looks like.
So the funny thing is, Mother Nature has just put out a tweet saying, "Injuries!" with an exclamation point for all the salmonella that's going around. What is with injuries, Patrick? Let's start.
Yeah.
The Canucks are on this mini hiatus here.
Yeah.
While they were whining about injuries, Bo Horvat actually managed to play, so the crisis wasn't as bad as they were leading us to believe.
Yeah.
But I do find the Elias Pettersson thing troubling. Day to day has turned into week to week, and is it turning into month to month?
Well, it's a good question. Sat Shaw and I guess Sat was talking about it on air the other day, but Sat and I have been talking about it, obviously. And, the timeline is, this is one of these ones. Like, there is sort of a way to say, the Canucks have sort of been reasonable in terms of the medical process, but like as ever, there's so much clutter that's of their own making that they don't get a whole lot of credit, I don't think, and don't deserve a whole lot of credit. Because if you were, the NBA is clear, and part of it is, we've talked about this before, part of it is the gambling factor. They just, essentially the gambling business wants more information. They need the information. But anyway, I mean, basically the process, as we understand it, was gets some sort of injury March 1st. Jim Benning told Scott Rintoul this on the air the same day we had the press conference, the beginning of the month. Possibly aggravated it the next night, which was March 2nd. Then he tries to take part in the morning skate on March 4th, which was against the Leafs, that 2-game series where they played really well. Started that incredible run this month. It was, the run that was mostly powered by Demko. And, initially it was day-to-day.
In like a lion, out like a lamb.
There you go. Actually, I hadn't even thought about that.
There's your lead for tomorrow.
Yeah. No, and then essentially, as I've been told, they finally got him in for an MRI, and there's a clinical diagnosis, which is we've all been through. You go see your doctor, they give you an exam. How does this hurt? What's your range of motion? All this kind of stuff. And whatever that initial diagnosis was, then you go send someone for a follow-up. And I guess once they got an actual image of what he was dealing with, they realized that it was the worst case a worst case scenario, obviously, for whatever the initial diagnosis was. We don't know what that is. Is it a fracture? I mean, we're at almost 4 weeks now that he's been out. At that point, I think once I got the imaging, it was about a week late. The next week, Travis Green said it'll be at least another week, which is Travis Green speak for week to week. And so it's been 4 weeks. Does he have a fracture? Is it a sprain? If it's a sprain, wrist sprains take a long time. If it's a fracture, you might even need surgery. If it's something else, you might need surgery. Yeah, you're right. It could easily become, this is now an issue of, is he even going to play again this season? There's nothing that we know either way to say that is a question at this point, but certainly wrist injuries, if it is what, as we suspect it is, those are never easy to come back from. And we saw Austin Matthews try to play through what he was dealing with, and he was, he in the end needed to sit out a few games. So obviously Elias Pettersson isn't the same injury because he's been out, like I said, for 4 weeks. But the timing's terrible. It was it's not like they didn't win without him, right? But the problem in the end, it's like I said with Tim Peel. Don't get distracted by Tim Peel. Don't get distracted by the fact Pettersson's been injured for March, because they won for much of March. The problem for this team came long before that, and that was the struggles in January, the poor goaltending in February, the underpowered lineup that it is, the fact that in the end this team's sitting 26th overall in the league, and they're to date paid out the 21st most amount in real dollars in terms of salary. Like, at the end of the day, you kind of get what you pay for. Who's in first? The Toronto Maple Leafs, who are one of the best teams in the league.
Yeah, and honestly, it's a story for another day. I don't want to get into it right now, but this whole the NHL and the gambling marriage, which is going to be stronger, means we won't have these vague basically lying about injuries as if it would give anyone an advantage going forward. But I don't think the Canucks have had a preponderance of injuries more than their rivals that have impacted their season. And as you say, they've kind of moved from one thing to another to another. Travis Green. Okay, so they lost a couple of games to Winnipeg this week after splitting with the Habs, which we termed a must. Last week we termed that sort of a must sweep. I see a little frustration with the fans where he's like, I liked our game tonight. We played well tonight. And it's like, okay, so Hellebuck maybe outdueled Demko a little bit, or special teams as you look at it, some really stupid penalties. Where is this team?
Lost, I think, is where to say. I mean, the funny thing about the injury question is that this has been a pretty healthy team for most of the season, right? They haven't there have been moments where there have been games where players have been absent, but there haven't been until the last couple weeks really that they've really had a real issue. Obviously, losing Pettersson is your number one center. That's going to catch up to you at some point. Tanner Pearson played a lot of minutes, a lot of important minutes. He may not have been scoring as much, but he's been a useful player for this team. That makes an impact, and he's been out for a couple of weeks now. Bo Horvat was a question mark, and going into Wednesday night, I found myself thinking if this, if there weren't playoff chase on the line, if they weren't so far out of it, would they really have put Horvat in, or just, risk further injury, or give him a moment to actually heal? Because you have these 6 days off. Clearly this was one of those ones. It was treated like a playoff game, and so he played. And he played pretty well. But you're right. I mean, at the end of the day, it's results based. You can play well all you want. Travis Green, I think, he at least early in the season, he was noted in these things, but he didn't want to play that card very much because, at a certain point, you've played it too often. And I think we've kind of hit the wall a little bit. And I think even he knows that. I mean, even with 19 games to go, their playoff hopes are done. Like there's no hope of reeling that back in. So, it is a frustrating thing for everyone concerned. There is no happy answer to the, what else is he supposed to say? And where is this team? Like I said, it's lost. They just don't, they had a good 2-3 weeks, which was built on the back of their goalie. But, the real story is that even when they were playing well in February, they weren't getting the results. And that ironically was because they weren't getting any goaltending. So that kind of sums it all up. If you need everything to work to get your wins, you're not a very good team. You need to be able to absorb some punches and win in different ways. And at the end of the day, this team, it just hasn't won enough this year, and too often has lost because they deserve to lose.
Yeah. And here you have Jake Virtanen gets a couple of goals and mouths off to everyone and then disappears again. I still can't believe the as a guy who's been given some top six time, couple of goals and no assists, like that's just unconscionable. So here's Jim Benning basically out scrounging for bottles, and he finds a toonie in a couple of okay players that he picks up from the Leafs. But nice, interesting juxtaposition this morning with the NHL trade deadline looming. San Francisco 49ers swing for the fences, give up a couple of firsts to get the number 3 pick from the Miami Dolphins. Obviously, they're going after a quarterback now, apples and oranges, I get it. But this is the big question for me with Jim Benning. If you are out of it, and everyone seemingly thinks they are, you look at even the bottom part of the roster, and this team has a lot of roster reconstruction to do. And it's fine to claim 2 more years, and yes, you'll have money to play with. But I look at this now, and there's a chance to accumulate some assets here. What's going through the GM's mind? What's going through the owner's mind? I know that's an unfair question to ask you. No, I'll keep my thoughts to myself on that one. But it's a really key period for the Vancouver Canucks in which they could make some significant process by making a big move like we saw today in the NFL.
Yeah.
How do you see this scenario these next couple of weeks playing out?
Well, the fact that apparently they're going to have this shortened quarantine does help matters. The fact that a player traded from the U.S. coming to Canada will only need to sit out for a week because they're getting tested every day. Like, there's actually a lot of science behind that.
Does it? Should the Canucks be looking at picks, not bringing in a player unless it's a
salary? Well, what I was going to say was that this actually makes it a lot harder. Because, there was up until this week, I'd argued before that there was a sort of a Canadian premium that the Canucks could try to take advantage of in making deals with, Toronto, Edmonton, Montreal, Winnipeg, Calgary, I suppose, although they're up against it now as well. And that doesn't exist anymore. So, you're now sort of looking at the fact that comparable players that, other teams in Canada might prefer, just aren't as, there's just not as much an advantage, and there might be players they're easier to get from down south. So, that really changes the dynamic. When you look at the players they really have to move, Brandon Sutter, Tanner Pearson, Jordy Ben, maybe Alex Edler. I mean, I think Alex Edler would probably have some appeal if you were willing to go somewhere, but you're going to have to convince them of that. And I just have a hard time imagining that, given how much, I think, he's never really been asked, but we know, like, we've asked him, and he wants to be here.
The family attachment to Vancouver, I don't think,
it's clear.
That they're in can't be discounted. And with COVID, he's going to want to leave his family behind. I think that's a non-starter.
Jake Virtanen, the 5 or 6 guys that, theoretically, which, could be players that maybe another team would want to add. They're just guys. Every team has players like that. I mean, I still think there's appeal. I don't think it's a challenge, but you look at, say, Edmonton, who I think, Ben Kuzma has linked the Oilers to having interest in Brandon Sutter. They don't really have any cap space. So how are you making that work? It becomes there's more variables than simply saying, well, this player would fit in well on that team. It's, he would in playing talent, but is there a cheaper alternative? Is there a younger alternative? What are you moving on, and what's your price? I mean, we know that Jim Benning's price for Jake Virtanen has been high, and the closest they got to a trade was trading for Danton Heinen, who was another player. Jim Benning's preference has been trading player for player. He for whatever reason, despite his sort of desire to be seen as this super scout and believing his own rep on that, and maybe he was, and certainly led a good, had a good scouting department working for him for 3 years. For whatever reason, has never been that interested in adding picks, even if they are in the end also treated as, essentially kind of currency, like I've been arguing for. Pick up some picks, you can turn them around and flip them for some players before the expansion draft. You can pick up a defenseman from Carolina, that kind of thing. So it's just what they're going to go for. I don't know. It's not, the rebuilding problem remains, that ownership has never wanted to admit that that's what you need to fully commit to. It cost Mike Gillis his job. It cost Trevor Linden his job. And at the end of the day, the reluctance to rebuild may cost Jim Benning his job. So it's a bizarre position.
Ultimately, though, do you see anything happening, or do you think it's more waiver wire flotsam?
I think, let's be honest. The Jimmy Vesey's fine. As I wrote, he's
not changing the fortunes.
But he's not changing the fortunes. He is a vanilla player. He's a player you need in your lineup. But he's played 4 or 5 games. He's had a couple chances to score, but he's not this. There's a reason why he was on waivers. There's a reason why the Leafs picked him up for cheap last summer as a free agent. This is a guy that. That's the lesson. Remember, is that instead of overpaying for guys to play on your third and fourth line, you can find guys like Jimmy Vesey who are just as capable, maybe more capable than guys like Antoine Roussel, and they're going to be cheaper, and you can find them in the free agencies, or you can find them on waivers. Travis Boyd and Jimmy Vesey in the end are guys that are kind of stopgap players. They don't change the sort of overall narrative on their own. They might change the narrative as sort of in the aggregate if you add them up with a bunch of other sharp moves that you can spend money on more important parts of your lineup. But they're both guys that kind of, if they end up trying to make a deal or two, if they're trying to make a trade, I think that's clear, is that at least there's elements in Canucks management that are trying to plan for that kind of position. Yeah. And if they're able to move a couple of players, they've got a couple of guys in there. They've got a center who can fill in, at the bottom of the lineup. They've got a winger who can play in the middle lines, which is you need those guys. But at the end of the day, we'll see. I still think they'll make a move or two. I think they have a good chance of making that happen. Certainly the lessons from 2016. Still burn. that they just didn't get anything for Dane Bravada or Dan Hamhuis, and there's no reason to have a repeat of that because that was just dumb. And you certainly don't want to have that happen again. But who knows? As I always say, hockey logic is backwards. And
well, the other thing too, we'll end it here, but I do think everything, for all the thank you Jim foolishness and maybe the GM's time is up, I think you always have to at least question what kind of filter ownership has on these moves. And I think that's the big question for Jim Benning. If he may want to swing for the fences and give up futures for another potential lottery pick, I think you need to be looking at those teams that maybe feel they need one more piece to go deeper in the playoffs. But, we don't know what ownership will allow him to do, and especially with the job uncertainty the way it is.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're just guessing at this point. But anyway, Patrick, I know you have a great piece coming on the weekend.
Yeah.
Sort of with the Canucks off, not playing till next Wednesday. Sort of examining where they are, looking at a bunch of numbers and theories, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that will be very well read, but we'll
looking forward.
Yeah, scratch our heads and see where this team is this time next week. Probably
Absolutely.
exactly the same place.
All right. Take care. See you next week.